So today, Dave, we're going to be talking about some key ethical terms, and I thought we'd look at deontology and teleology to start with.
Okay, so deontological and teleological are terms used when people are trying to make sense of ethics and make sense of different kind of families of ethical theory. So deontological, by that we refer not only but mainly to ethics that are described as Kantian, but deontological really covers those to do with duty.
Mm.
So when you act out of a sense of duty, but that sense of duty isn't necessarily duty towards a nation or duty towards an individual, but duty towards what is the right thing to do, to what Kant calls the moral law. But deontological ethics are interesting. They're often quite challenging to people, and that they are not really that flexible, and they're not that negotiable. Therefore, if something is in principle wrong, it remains wrong. You can't appeal to consequences. You can't appeal to particular cases. If something's wrong, it's wrong. So deontological ethics tends to have the character of being very principled. So whether or not it leads to certain outcomes or not isn't amenable as a discussion.
I think that's true. I mean, deontological ethics has to do with intentions, in that sense, principled action. But I sometimes wonder whether people kind of overinterpret the strictness of it. Because even Kant was aware that, in principle, something might not be possible. But his idea was, if you didn't have these stringent ideals, what kind of orientation would you have in the world at all? So yes, it might be not possible, for example, if you take like lying. Kant would say lying is always wrong in principle. But even he was aware that maybe in certain circumstances you would have to lie.
Yeah,
so the empirical application of a law does not always require, but his view is, if you didn't have these absolute principles, there'd be no guide or any orientation in ethical life whatsoever. Everything would be up to revision, debate.
Yeah, and I think Kant said he wants to keep that very strict view because it's deeply embedded in his idea of people being kind of beings worthy of dignity, being treated well, not treating people as a means to an end, but as ends in themselves.
I think it also had to do with the fact that Kant, he didn't want ethics based on sentiment, because his belief was, if you based your ethics on feelings, well, today you might feel well disposed towards somebody, and so treat them ethically, like I feel towards you today. But tomorrow you might even irritate me, so I think, I don't respect you
sentiment.
Anymore. So for him, that was another reason it had to be based on reason. And Kant would say, if our morality is based on reason, then the principles we use to make ethical decisions can't be revised, because it would be like saying that 2 + 2 could equal 4 one day and equal 5 the next. So reason has to be universal and objective. If something's rational, Kant would say, it has to be universal and objective.
So it's a real attempt to say ethics is not about who I like and don't like, and because I like someone, therefore I think it's okay to treat them better than somebody I don't really like. So that's, in a sense, gives us deontological ethics as this kind of ethics really concerned with reason, concerned with universal laws, concerned with principle, and acting out of duty to the moral law.
Probably the biggest example in modern life that most people are human rights. They're all Kantian. Nobody believes that human rights should be reversible. They're absolute.
Yeah. And doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So you could accidentally do the right thing, or do the right thing because it happened to coincide with your sentiment,
your feelings,
or your self-interest. But actually, it would only be a virtuous act in the Kantian or deontological sense if you did it for the right reason. So it's not enough to do the right thing to be a good person. You have to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So it's quite demanding.
It is very demanding.
But that might be a good thing.
It might be a good thing.
On the other hand, we have this teleological ethics, which is much more in terms of an empirical outcome.
Yeah, I mean, the way to think about it, ontological ethics are about intentions. Am I acting on principle? Teleological ethics are about outcomes.
So if I do something and it leads to appalling outcomes for human suffering, I put it as a bad thing?
Yeah, so in a certain sense, you in a teleological conception of ethics, you could act on principle, but if it led to bad outcomes, that wouldn't be, and in some sense, not ethical. Whereas for Kant, it's the way he's not interested in outcomes at all.
No, and he kind of almost wants to sort of bracket them out of the whole discussion of ethics and say they're empirical concerns, not ethical. They're practical wisdom, not a kind of ethical concern. Yes, you need to obviously make sure you don't do anything really incompetently. So I don't try and help an old lady over the road and end up killing her by pushing her in front of a lorry. But from a teleological perspective, it's about, well, I suppose teleology, when it's used elsewhere in philosophy of religion, is to do with things in terms of their goal or purpose and goal-directed action. So in ethics, if we keep that in mind, it's just that it's ethics which is trying to produce. So sometimes there's a bit of confusion because utilitarian or teleological ethics are sometimes also about intention, but they're an intention for the outcome. So I will try and act so as to produce happiness, or try and act so as to limit suffering. So even when it's about intention, it's about framing it in the context of what will happen in the world. That almost makes ethics seem like they're empirically measurable. Now, how much happiness did I cause and how much misery did I cause? Let's measure it. Let's do a survey.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest debate within teleological ethics is if you do consider ethics in terms of outcomes, which seems quite reasonable, then what actually is the criteria you use to measure whether an outcome is beneficial or not?
Because I think it's very easy to be quite mocking of crude utilitarianism to just talk about happiness. Because we know that happiness is quite subjective, quite hard to measure. It's not necessarily a simple thing. How do we kind of rate contentment versus excitement? And is happiness always a good thing anyway? Humans being miserable creates good poetry and good music and good art. Humans being happy just creates banal, kind of grinning fools. So the whole idea of what those outcomes look like is actually much more complicated than it looks. Yeah.
And there's no doubt, I mean, the real issue, I suppose, is the distinction between quality and quantity. There's no doubt within that utilitarianism is very attractive, a kind of economic way of thinking about goods. Because, if you can quantify something, it's very easy to say, well, that's better than that. So if you measure something and say, that's 6 and that's 5, of course 6 is better than... So a lot of cost-benefit analysis is... But I sometimes worry about whether that really is ethical at all, really, that kind of quantified notion of human happiness.
There is sometimes, I think, something a little kind of chilling about people doing what's sometimes called hedonic calculus. Start doing maths about how many people can be allowed to suffer in order for other people to be happy. It is like using some people, the ones that lose out, as a means to the end of other people's happiness. So I think the more you think about it and the more you see it used, that some people can suffer for the benefit of a greater number. That's what we see behind the kind of the mass political kind of killings of the 20th century.
Yeah, it's whether you think that suffering is quantifiable. Whether one person's suffering is less meaningful than another person's suffering.
Yeah, and whether people's suffering can be traded, almost like kind of carbon trading or something we can offset by making some people happy, misery inflicted on others. It's kind of So I think there is a sense in which utilitarianism is very appealing initially. Because it can be calculated and measured, all those things that are normally so difficult in philosophy. It looks like we've actually made progress. But the more you look at it, I think, the more it begins to make many people involved in the study of ethics quite uncomfortable. Okay, and I think with our discomfort, talk about deontology and teleology, we probably ought to pause there.